Hey everybody, it's Dr. Law. Wanted to leave you a brief video message for week 1 on vicarious trauma. Want to remind everybody though to please remember to read all of the required information. It really does help not only with your discussion but with your understanding of what vicarious trauma is. So I'm going to talk about a few different things first. So you'll hear about a lot about burnout, compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, or vicarious trauma as well. First, if you can think of trauma as any situation or event or scenario that you are directly involved in, or that you have knowledge of or have witnessed, that causes you to feel hopeless, helpless, powerless, vulnerable, but then has long-term symptoms with it. I'm talking about like the post-traumatic stress spectrum and the symptoms that go along with trauma. Then that is trauma. The reason I say that is because what's traumatic for one person may not be for another, and there are many reasons why. Some of those could be simply because of the person's ability to bounce back or their resilience. Could be their genetics. It could be even down to the size of their hippocampus. All kinds of things. There's many aspects of it. But the important thing is that as you're working with clients is that you look and see if the situation was traumatic for them, not necessarily to prior clients that you had. So anyways, having said that, secondary trauma, let's go to this first. Secondary trauma happens when you are a witness of something, or you have direct or indirect knowledge of it, and it causes that spectrum of symptoms. Secondary trauma a lot of times happens to us as clinicians. We hear a lot of stories. We're going to become, or you will become, a vault of information and secrets that people will tell you. And some of those things are not pleasant. They're very difficult not only for them to say, but for us to hear. And so vicarious trauma, it can show up with us as clinicians in many ways. It can show up as burnout or compassion fatigue. We just don't have any compassion left. We don't feel any compassion towards others or ourselves, and not just with our work, but in our personal lives as well. And when that happens, what you'll notice with yourself is there's a lot more dread to go to work. There's dread maybe even for specific clients because they trigger you or something like that. To give an example, the first time I noticed secondary trauma, I was working with trying to remember, it was a Latina woman, my bad. And she was probably in her mid-40s to early 50s, somewhere around there. She came in because she had lost her daughter. She had passed away after her ex-boyfriend had killed her. And that wasn't what caused the trauma, although there was definitely trauma there. What caused trauma is that my client had worked for law enforcement, and she was in charge of records. And so she opened up her daughter's file. Probably should not have done that, but it happened. And when she opened up that file, she saw pictures of her daughter and of the crime scene and everything that went along with it. And when that hit her, of course, you know, it's pretty obvious that she experienced some pretty adverse symptoms after that. Anxiety, panic attacks, flashbacks from seeing the pictures, flashbacks of how her mind, and she created the scenario of how everything happened with her daughter, all kinds of things. So she developed full-on post-traumatic stress. And as she was describing this to me in her first session, as we were gathering information to make a diagnosis and also trying to develop the rapport and everything, I developed my own symptoms. I'm a very visual person. I always have been just a visual learner, and so as she's describing it to me, I'm seeing it in my own head. And I remember as I left work that day, I was shaking. My hands were shaking. And I couldn't get those images out of my head. And again, they weren't my images. They were secondary to this lady. And so I immediately called my boss. It was also he had been my supervisor during internship and everything, and I continued on under his mentorship. And I said, I am messed up. Something happened. So I described it to him on the phone, and he said, yep, that is called secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. And it's not your trauma, but your body and your brain have made it so. So he gave me some exercises to go home to try to work. Basically, he says, you got to clean it out of you. Whatever you take in, you've got to learn to put it out. And remember that this is a job. This isn't your life. This is your job. This is your career path that you've chosen. And so I followed his directions. They were helpful. I was able to continue on working with that client all the way through the end. And there have been other incidents where that's happened again, where, again, I got pulled in, let myself go in too far. As time has gone on, I've learned much more about the importance of, we always use the word self-care. I would say, what is it you are doing in your life to have joy? What is it that brings you happiness? And what is it that you are doing with your job so that you can have that? Not necessarily just working with clients to be happy, but what are you doing to continue on with your life? And making sure that you have a balance. Because work is work. It'll always be there. It'll never go away for most of us unless we're independently wealthy, which I am not. So I continue to work. But there are many things I do in my life for self-care. I work so I can live. I work so I can spend time with my wife and my children, so I can spend time in the outdoors, so I can spend time doing activities that are spiritually uplifting for me, and many, many other things. And so that's the important thing. Self-care helps to prevent vicarious trauma. It is also an intervention, but prevention is always best. So this week's opportunity, you'll be able to think about vicarious or secondary trauma. You'll be able to think about your own activities, things that bring you joy. And I would admonish you to write them down and make sure that you're doing them no matter what. Even while you're in grad school, you need to do it. But that's it for today. I look forward to hearing from you all this week.